Oh, Overwatch. From being the game of the year in 2016 to fighting a full-out lawsuit in 2021, this game has changed so much in its 8 years of existence. And likewise, so has its gameplay, going from 6v6 to 5v5 and experiencing some questionable balancing. And with these changes, it has become more and more difficult to rank up in Overwatch, in particular on some roles. Being on controller, the two biggest problems for me are toxicity and plugins, which make ranking up more difficult. And yet, despite not playing competitively, I still got top 32 in Europe. Also completely solo queuing and with pure skill. Definitely wasn't because this character was broken for half a season. People have been asking for my sensitivity, my crosshairs, general tips, so I decided, let's just make a video on 5 tips that I think are the most important to rank up in Overwatch. But before we go any further, everything that I say should be taken with a grain of salt, because I'm not a competitive player and most definitely not the Buddha of Overwatch, so everything said is going to be my personal opinion and should not be used as a rulebook. And with all that being said, let's get to the actual tips. Coming in at number 1, this is going to be the most generic one of them all, but you gotta stop blaming your teammates for every game you lose. It can and often is very tempting to shift the blame onto someone else in the team, completely ignoring your own performance in the game. However, this could often lead to repeating the same mistakes, losing more games, and also just being a horrible person to your teammates, which no one really wants. Now, people usually say you should analyze your game using something like replay mode. However, I know that with this generation's attention span, there's no one that's gonna do that. So after a lost game, just take a quick moment to think about what could you have done better that game. Could it be something mechanical, such as your aim, or could it be something social, such as communicating with your team? The quicker you're able to identify your own mistakes and take responsibility, the quicker you'll be able to recover from a loss and not be as tilted and carry on playing. And speaking of identifying mistakes, that is going to lead me nicely onto my second point, which is your positioning. Positioning refers to both where you are and what character you're playing, because depending on what those two things are, your job in the team can be very different. For example, if you picked Ana on Dorado, your job is to stay on the high ground and sustain your team from above. When playing on the low ground, you are very exposed and will likely die very easily, so you should try to avoid playing down there. Similarly, if you're playing Sigma, you want to be playing around a corner rather than standing in the middle of the street, as this will leave you more cover and you will likely survive for longer. With every decision you make, whether you're playing DPS, tank or support, you want to consider your positioning as much as possible. Being down a pick can often guarantee fight lost or fight won, so the longer you survive for, the more pressure you put on the enemy team and the more likely you are to win. And speaking of picks, we're going to move on to tip number 3, which is to pick your character wisely. Having an idea about the meta and being able to play a lot of different compositions, you will be able to win a lot more games and synergize with your team a lot better. In particular, counter picking is a very popular thing to do in Overwatch. As a tank player, counter swapping to counter the enemy tank can often depict between a win and a loss. So when you load into a game, make sure that you pick something that is going to 1. Help the team, 2. Match your team composition, and 3. You are good at. And if you get one of these players, but you don't know how to play the character they've told you to swap to, then I'd recommend to just stick to what you're good at. Of course, don't just completely ignore what people say. It is often very useful to listen to other people's advice, but if they're just being rude for no apparent reason, then I'd recommend to just not listen to them. And on the topic of listening to people, this is going to get me nicely onto tip number 4, which is going to be to communicate with your team. Now, this one could be difficult for a couple of you, because I get that not everybody likes to talk in voice chat to other people who they don't know. So in order to counteract that, I would recommend to either play with your friends or simply join voice chat and listen to other people who are commenting in it. Just by hearing other people's callouts, your team synergy will improve vastly, and you as a player will be able to synergize with your team a lot better. Furthermore, by talking to more people, you will be able to get more comfortable at speaking in voice chat and also maybe learn about other compositions which you might not have heard of. And finally, to wrap up the video, I will give a 5th and final tip, which will actually include 2 tips in one, and that will be to watch other people and look at their crosshair placement. Often watching pro players or streamers can help somebody to learn more about a character and get better at them. In my case, in order to get good at tank, I decided to start binge watching Flats in order to get better at Reinhardt, and it just so happens that now, Reinhardt is one of my favorite characters. Watching Flats play helped me to understand the role of me and my team and what I needed to do do in order to win more games. And regarding crosshair placement, Reinhardt is not a very good example to use, but on any hit scan and projectile characters, you want to make sure that wherever your bullet lands, it preferably hits the head. And in terms of getting adjusted to settings, I personally believe that your personal settings are your best to use for both crosshairs and sensitivity. It's important to note that even if you do apply all 5 of these tips, you may often get situations where some things are just not in your favor. For example, you may be having a bad game, or the other team is just so much better than you that you can't really do anything. And in that case, you just gotta go next. But to those who need them, I hope that you apply these in your games and see some improvement, whether that's with your rank or just your gameplay overall. Remember that whatever efforts you put in, they will be eventually rewarded. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you all in my next video. Peace out.